And we are back with the fifth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I'm going to give off some of my predictions on who's going to win in tonight's game. Now, these are they're going to be a few, like there's only going to be 4 games tonight, so I'm only going to give it's going to be a much shorter segment than usual. And I'll go ahead and I'll acknowledge some more people in the chat. Marcan Ferreira, he continues to talk about Bronny and talk down on Bronny James. Lakers wait until the worst players are on the court to send Bronny in. Bronny is playing against the second crew. And he, on the comment that I said about Zachary Rasacher and Alexander Czar playing bad, he says they're playing against A-list players. And it doesn't matter that they're playing against A-list players. That is why they got picked number 1 and number 2 in the draft. So they could play well against A-list players. And right now they aren't doing that. If this was any other draft class that didn't have Bronny James in it, they would get a lot of attention and they would most likely get way more criticism than Bronny does. So I think that the criticism towards Bronny is a little bit unfair given how the number 1 and the number 2 pick in the draft aren't necessarily playing up to their expectations. And that's really all that I have to say about that. And I mean, look, they're the number 1 and the number 2 pick in the draft. I don't know why you picked them number 1 and number 2 in the draft just to be mediocre. Not to mention Reed Shepherd, who I thought was going to be the favorite to win Rookie of the Year, is also not really playing all that well in this regular season. In fact, let me just go ahead and look at the box scores and what he ended up putting up in this game. Because honestly, I didn't even see him play all that much in this game. He only played 3 minutes in this matchup, and he ended up scoring 0 points. So, again, 3 minutes, so that is rather unfair. But in the last few games that he's played, and so far he's played in 4 of these games, let's go ahead and look at Reed Shepherd and his averages real quick. Because from the last time I saw his averages, he was only averaging 3 points. Now he's averaging 2.5 points, 0.8 rebounds, and 1 assist. Again, these are the top 3 picks in the NBA draft, and here they are playing really, really bad. So I don't think that of course, the criticism towards Bronny is incredibly unfair because it's like these 3 top picks in the draft aren't even playing up to the best of their abilities, and or at least the ability that a lot of people expect from a top 1, top 2, or top 3 pick in the draft. That's just the way it is, and they're not getting any sort of scrutiny for that because Bronny is in this draft. So I think that criticism is rather unfair towards Bronny, but that's just me. So on to these games that ended up happening that are going to happen today. The televised games are going to be the Mavericks against the Timberwolves. That's going to be on TNT at 7:30. And the Pelicans matching up against the Warriors. That's also going to be on TNT at 10 after the Mavericks and the Timberwolves game conclude. The rest of the other 2 games, they're going to be on local channels. The Nuggets are playing against the Nets, and the Kings are going to play against the Jazz. The Kings play at 9 as opposed to playing at 10. So, excuse me. But in this matchup, I think the Nuggets are going to end up beating the Brooklyn Nets. I know that the Denver Nuggets are really struggling, and they only ended up winning 1 game. So did the Nets. They only ended up winning 1 game, and that 1 game was a big shocker against the Milwaukee Bucks. But really, anything is possible when Doc Rivers is your head coach for Milwaukee. But I think the Nuggets are going to end up prevailing in this matchup. Really, the Nets don't have anything to stop Jokic. They do have Claxton, but at the same time, I really don't think that Claxton is going to be enough to slow down the 3-time MVP Nikola Jokic. And so I think that I picked the Nuggets to win this matchup. And I will say I do think that Cam Thomas is going to end up dropping maybe like 30 points in this matchup, but still that's not going to be enough for the Denver Nuggets. Now, the Mavericks and the Timberwolves, that's probably going to be the trickiest game to pick like in this matchup because I genuinely cannot decide on which team I think is going to end up prevailing. The Timberwolves, they do play at home, and I'm going to pick the Timberwolves in this matchup. They play at home. I feel like there's going to be a lot of bad blood between these 2 teams. I think Anthony Edwards is going to have a really good game in this matchup, and I don't know. I'm not really entirely sold on Klay Thompson and his efficiencies yet, not to mention Kyrie and his efficiencies as well. I th- I do think that the Timberwolves can end up prevailing in this matchup, especially having the home court advantage. Now, the Warriors, they're going to match up against the Pelicans. Now, despite that the Pelicans don't have DeJounte Murray, they've still been a really formidable team. They did struggle against the Portland Trailblazers in the last matchup, but they did end up prevailing. And the Warriors, they ended up losing to the Clippers. So coming off of this loss to the Clippers, I don't think that the Warriors will be able to beat the Pelicans. I'm going to pick the Pelicans to win in this matchup against Golden State. And I mean, Curry, he hasn't really been playing all that well, so he's definitely due for a good game, but I don't see it happening against the Pelicans. I genuinely just don't. It could happen, though, considering how they don't have DeJounte, who is a very formidable perimeter defender, but still, I don't see that really happening. I do expect Buddy Hield to go off in this matchup. Next, I think the Kings are going to beat the Jazz, despite the fact that the Jazz are playing at home. And the Jazz, they are one of the worst teams arguably the worst team in the entirety of the Western Conference right now. In fact, let's actually go ahead and look at the standings just to make sure. Yeah, so far the Jazz, they are the only team in the NBA, in the Western Conference that hasn't won a game. The other team in the NBA that hasn't won a game is, of course, the Detroit Pistons. I mean, who would have guessed it? And for some reason, the Wizards, they're pretty high in the seeding, despite the fact that they're 1-2. But then again, the Bucks are all the way down below in the seedings, being 1-3. So that really says a lot about Doc Rivers and his coaching. And I know I keep picking on Doc Rivers, but I can't help it because it's really, I am baffled that the Bucks ended up firing their head coach and ended up picking up Doc Rivers as their head coach. I think it was a really bad decision, and I don't expect Doc Rivers to keep having a job. And that's really unfortunate because after Doc Rivers, who's lined up next is most likely Darvin Ham, and that is also less than ideal for the Bucks. But those are my picks for tonight. I think the Nuggets are going to win, I think the Timberwolves are going to win, and I think the Pelicans are going to win, and I think the Kings are going to win. Let me know in the comments what you guys think and whether or not you guys think that these teams are going to end up prevailing in this matchup. But that's all that I have to say, and that's it for the show. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something that you've just been dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. They really help the show, make it much more interactive between myself and you guys, and if Super Chat is not really your thing, then that's all right. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. They really help the show. They make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And that's all that I really have to say about this for this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.